we'll start with Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. And a couple mnemonics or ways to remember the stages on the exam are as follows. Stupid Piaget creates fuss. So sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, informal operational. So each letter of the beginning represents a particular stage. And another one, some people can fly. Same idea, but just clever ways for you guys to remember the different stages on the exam. So the first stage is sensory motor, and the ages of that is 0 to 2 years old. So it looks at how thought processes function within the use of symbols. So if you picture a kid, most kids pick up every single thing on the planet and in their path. Why? Because that's how they're learning, because they're utilizing their senses to pick up what the environment is for them. So part of the name, sensory motor, is based on senses. Why? Because they're utilizing their senses as sensors in their environment. So motor connectivity without the use of symbols, meaning all things are learned based on experience. So if you picture a 0 to 2-year-old kid, when they're able to crawl, they're crawling everywhere. And once they get that ability to walk or run, they're running and touching everything and doing all the destruction in their path. Why? Because they're utilizing their senses and motor activity to learn their environment and what works for them and what does not work for them. And the main goal within this is object permanence, which is knowing something is there even when it is gone and out of sight. So an example of object permanence, peekaboo, separation from a parent or caregiver. So someone that does not have object permanence thinks that their parent or caregiver is gone forever. Or you put a sheet over them and the kid's like, oh my God, where did they go? And then you drop the sheet and they're super stunned and surprised and excited again. So key components, as I stated, body movements and the use of senses. Why? Because they're using their body movements to navigate the room and their senses to understand what is pleasurable or safe or what is danger or bad. The child will utilize their senses and experiences to learn their environment and navigate it accordingly. So if we take anything out of this, the first stage is them utilizing their stages or like senses and motor activity to get experience and exposure in the environment. So 2 scenarios to solidify and cement that is imagine yourself walking around a room and a baby is in his crib playing with his feet and looking around at different objects in the room. In the same room, picture a child running around making motor sounds with their toy car. So in this example, the young child playing with his feet symbolizes the use of symbols to get familiar with the room, as well as their eyes looking around. And the young child making motor sounds symbolizes the motor part of the name, sensory motor. So the second example, and more of an adult example, imagine yourself driving around in your car and you hear a sound coming from the motor and you use your senses to get an idea of what is going on in the situation. So you hear stuff going on, you'll turn the radio all the way down and say, all right, what's going on? Even if you're not mechanically inclined, you are trying to self-diagnose that car because you want to understand what's going on in the situation. So in this example, the sound coming from the motor is to recall the motor part of the name. And the use of your senses is to remember the sensory part of the name because you're utilizing your senses and motor activity to understand what's going on in a situation to feel comfortable or uncomfortable if that is what happens. So stage 2 is pre-operational. So this is prior to you being able to operationally think. So this is the ages of 2 to 7 years old. So during this stage, young children can think about things symbolically, but not abstractly quite yet. So this is the ability to make one thing, such as a word, object, experience, or time, stand for something other than the object. So this is when kids don't have to see something directly to understand it. They can simply compare different things to know that something is about to happen. So for example, a child hears the music for an ice cream truck and associates it with getting ice cream. So regardless of what is actually happening, they may hear a particular song and say, yup, I'm getting ice cream. I need to run outside and get ready. Another example, Someone hears the word ASWB or exam and they instantly become anxious about having to take it again. They don't have to be in the exam room. They don't have to see the actual exam. They just hear words and cues and automatically can experience that situation or know what it would feel like to be in that situation again. Another example, I hear the sound of water boiling and I think of spending time with my father drinking coffee. Again, I don't have to actually be in that experience to make the connection of, wow, this is something I've been around before, or this is something that I really, really enjoy. However, thinking is still egocentric, meaning your ego is the center of attention, meaning you feel like you are super duper important. So all they are able to do is think about themselves without consideration of others. They have difficulty taking the perspective of others and often have problems when things do not go their way. This is where we have fits. This is where we're going to have people losing their absolute minds around not getting their way because their ego is the center of it. And they feel like, regardless of what's going on in their environment, they should be catered to and what they think should be respected 100% of the time. And this is also where the development of language, memory, and imagination occur. So intelligence or thought processes are both egocentric, meaning again, it's all about them, not considering anyone else. And it's also intuitive, meaning believing something based on their feelings rather than conscious thought. So they will defend what they think even when evidence is provided against it. So you could have a kid in the store telling their parent that I want this stack now. And the parent's like, well, dinner is coming up soon. We just have to get home and buy the groceries and make it. They're like, no, I want it now. And it's all based on what they want, regardless of what the situation is. And they know they're getting food later. It's just my pleasure overrides any rational thought. So again, they're not able to cognitively think it through. It's all emotion based and it's all about them. So milestones of this particular stage are magical thinking and symbolic functioning. So magical thinking is the idea that one's thoughts or desires influence the environment and situations that they're involved in. So I feel like I have magical powers based on the fact that I am who I am. So for example, the child might think that their nightlight will keep monsters away. So irregardless that this is not happening, they believe that it is, and it is reality for them. Another example, a child believes that since they thought about not wanting to have their brother around, so their brother ends up in the hospital and they believe it is their fault since they thought about not wanting to have him around. Again, not connected at all, but they still believe in that situation. Another example, someone heard that drinking honey before taking their ASWB exam would help them pass. So they drink honey and pass, so they believed it helped them do so. Again, two things that are not connected at all, but people like to associate because it feels right and people like to be right. So they tag special things onto it. The second milestone, symbolic functioning, is when a child learns the use of mental images and other symbols that are not present. So, for example, the child will sing to their teddy bear to put it to sleep. So, they have been sung to sleep or they've seen someone get sung to sleep. So, they start singing inanimate objects to sleep based on the fact that that's what they think should happen for everybody. They utilize that experience and impose it on anything in their environment. So, for example, again, the child will play doctor to a doll that fell off the bed. So they have fallen off the bed or they have been injured and someone has tended and put a bandage and mended them. So they start associating that their stuffed animals that don't really have that ability to become injured are injured. So it's that imaginary play within their situation. So that way they can start functioning only in the symbols, though. Remember that abstract thinking outside of them is not there. They're only able to make associations based on feelings and what they actually think. So to solidify this particular stage, there are two scenarios. So the first one, imagine you're babysitting a child and they are pretending to nurse a broken leg on their doll that fell off the bed earlier that day. So again, this is an example of symbolic functioning in imaginary play. So they're able to imagine something that has been in their environment and putting it on other things. A second example. So this is the example from the first one. So imagine you're the person in the first scenario with car trouble. The person begins to think that if they were nicer to their significant other that morning, that their car would have not broken down. That is an example of magical thinking. Bringing two scenarios together that are not related and making it related based on the fact that is what feels right and helps you cope with it. Stage 3 is concrete operational. So this is where you're able to get operational only with concrete, aka solid objects. So the child begins to develop logical or operational type thinking that can only apply their critical thinking to objects. So the child can work things out internally in their head rather than having to directly experience the situation. So the prior two stages, the child had to experience everything that they did to get that experience. So, for example, rather than punching a wall to know what is hard, they can just imagine they would break their hand if they punched it. So they're like, well, that wall looks pretty hard. Hard surfaces break. So if I did this, it's going to hurt me. Another example, not having to touch a candle flame to know what is hot. They avoid it because of what they've heard in the past. So they're like, wow, fire's hot. I put my hand on the fire. I'm going to get burnt. Prior to this, the kid is going to lunge towards the fire to get the job done. So this is ages 7 to 11. So picture 7 to 11-year-old. They're asking questions, why? And they're asking it because they want to know. So that way they can put it in their bank to know what they should and should not do. So the child can begin to play games with real rules because they can see the connection of why they're in place. Prior to this, and they just did based on what felt right and what could help them in certain situations. So they're able to picture actual objects and say, this is what would happen. But it's not that abstract thinking of if then this. So two scenarios that can further articulate this is if I get angry and punch that wall, it could hurt my hand. So they're able to see the cause and effect type relationship between other things. So if people do not take turns, then the game is no longer fun. So they're able to see why things are in place, but aren't able to think beyond that. So milestones of this stage are conservation and classification. Key emphasis on conserve because they're willing to and able to conserve things and see things through. So understanding that something stays the same in quantity even when the appearance changes. So it's the ability to identify properties of categories rather than having to see it as a whole. So to understand what the situation is. So it's the ability to critically think and construct things with minimal directions. So for example, so it's like putting 8 ounces of water into a 16-ounce bottle. It's going to look less than if it was in that 16-ounce bottle than it would be an 8-ounce bottle. It would be all the way to the top. You pour that bottle into the 16-ounce bottle, and it's going to be halfway. So the kid is going to, prior to this stage, say, I'm getting less than you. That's not fair. So if you gave them the 8-ounce bottle and you wanted the 16-ounce bottle and you filled it up X amount, you would actually get more than they would. But in this stage, like, hey, sucker, I ain't going for that because I know the difference between these two things now. So it appears like it is less, but it's actually the same quantity. Another example, imagine 6 rows of 2 pennies. So we have 12 pennies total. And then another situation, you have 2 rows of 6 pennies. Prior to this, they would not be able to make the differentiation and they would think that 2 rows of 6 pennies was more. They're like, oh my God, I'm getting so much more. But at the same token, they are the same amount. The presentation just changed. So at this time, they're able to conserve an object even though they're not able to see it whole. So for another example, let's say I have a concrete block, I slam it against the ground, it's in pieces now. Someone that has conservation would be able to say that is a whole concrete block if I put it back together. Classification, on the other hand, key emphasis on classify. This is where we're able to put different things that look similar into classes or categories. So it's the ability to identify properties of categories related to each other. So it's the ability to identify objects as they are similar, as well as the ability to categorize the different aspects of similar objects. So picture this. You have a red cat, blue cat, black cat, and you have red flowers, blue flowers, and black flowers. So the child would be able to categorize all the cats together as well as the flowers. So if we were to categorize the cats, you'd put the red cat, blue cat, and black cat together. And then the flowers, you'd separate it out to red flowers, blue flowers, and black flowers. However, we can also categorize it based on colors. So the red cat and red flower, blue cat and blue flowers, and the black cat and black flowers. Prior to this, they weren't able to put them together and match them. But since we have classification, aka putting them into the similar classes, we're able to do this. So that is the two milestones of that particular stage. So scenarios to remember the stage. So imagine you see a group of children playing with some concrete blocks, and one of them throws the concrete block at the ground and yells, "Be careful, I'm on a mission. Do not want anyone to have an operation." The kids scatter. So the name concrete operational is exhibited, and they see the danger when the object comes. They're able to think logically about objects. So again, the concrete blocks for the concrete part of the name. And then when they say, "Be careful, I don't want anyone to get an operation," they're able to say, if I throw that concrete block at the ground, it could scatter and shards could hit me. So they're able to see the danger and run prior to it happening. And it also emphasizes operation for operational. The second scenario, imagine kids playing and they accidentally break a concrete block into pieces and they try to put it back together and a parent yells, "You better fix this or you'll get an operation." So this is an example of conservation. So they break it into pieces and they're able to say, "We can put it back together." Before this, some younger kids would say, "Yup, it's broken. I don't know. Oh my God, this is terrible." These kids are able to say, "Let's put this back together because we're probably not supposed to break this." And again, key emphasis on operation for the second part of it. So the concrete for the concrete operational. An example of the conservation again, because conservation is you're conserving things that are in pieces to make them whole once again. The last stage is formal operational, and this is ages 11 years old and into adolescence. So this is where the child begins to think about abstract concepts, meaning things that are not just black and white. They're able to think in the gray and what could possibly be rather than what actually is. So it's the ability to plan toward the future. So the child will begin to think hypothetically as well as associate different things that are not inherently associated. So they can look at a problem and come up with a systematic solution, not just things that are explicitly stated. And a term that articulates this is hypothetical deductive reasoning, or the ability to think abstractly through generating predictive measures of a hypothesis. So if I do not study, then I'll have a higher likelihood to fail. So it's being able to think through a situation and come up with a solution to decide a better outcome. So they tend to avoid impulsive and think through more logically. So they avoid impulsive actions and think through situations to get more practical responses. So when thinking through life decisions, it allows for them to identify pros and cons of each solution to analyze the outcome. So if I do not eat, then I will not have as much energy. If I drink 2 cups of coffee at 7 p.m., then I will likely not sleep as early as I'd like to. So scenarios to remember this stage, imagine someone preparing for a formal dance. They will think of how they want to go with Susan. However, if he goes with Susan, then they will likely have to be home by 10 p.m. So he has to decide whether it is worth going with her or not. So formal dance for formal operational. And then if he goes with Susan, then he'll have to be home by 10 p.m. It's a hypothetical deductive reasoning, being able to predict and associate and do the pros and cons of each situation. Another example, someone wants to buy a video game from a store that costs $60. The child knows that they can get 30 from an allowance at the end of the week for doing their chores. Therefore, they'll have to do their chores for 2 weeks to be able to afford their game. So they would need to do the chores to get their game, but they're able to say, I get $30 for my allowance, and it would take me 2 weeks because 30 times 2 is 60. So they're able to say, if I do this, then this. So now an easy way to remember the ages, stage one is between 0 and 2 when it ends, which is ages 0 to 2, which again is sensory motor. Stage 2 starts at 2 and takes until 7 to become operational, ages 2 to 7 pre-operational. Stage 3 requires that we pay a fee at our local 7-Eleven made out of concrete, ages 7 to 11, concrete operational. In stage 4, we open the door for our date around 11 at the formal dance, ages 11 and beyond, which is formal operational. So just clever ways to kind of remember them. So throughout this, there's different forms of adaptation to new stimuli. So a simulation is adding a new idea, behavior, activity into someone's life, and their identity is not lost from the introduction of the ideologies. So the easy way to remember this is a simulation has 2 S's, which means the client stays the same. So if they stay the same, their identity is not lost in any way, shape, or form, and they're able to preserve who they actually are. It's just introducing small things into their life to change them, but their identity is not lost. So a couple of examples to keep this in mind is a chef learns a new recipe. So this recipe does not change that they're a chef. It simply makes them a little different. Another example, someone passes their LCSW exam, yet they still hang around people from other disciplines. So even though the person passed, they're the same person. Now, if they only hung out with social workers based on the fact that they passed their social work licensure exam, then that would be a different situation, which would be accommodation. But another example for a simulation where the person stays the same, person begins taking yoga classes, yet they continue all of their normal activities. They did not let yoga take over who they actually are. It's just an activity that they do. So the person begins taking the classes, but does not consume or change their person or schedule, etc. And one last example, Eddie starts attending Phil's Sunday study groups, yet he utilizes the other materials that he has. So Eddie obtains new information, but allows for it to complement what he has rather than taking it over. The other term when we're adapting and changing our behaviors is accommodation, and key emphasis on the 2 C's, because changing or altering current schemas or thought processes in a response to new information. So the 2 C's represent the client changes in some way. So you're introduced something new and it entirely changes everything that you do. So someone gets information or they start doing a new behavior or an activity and they change what they are who they identify based on the new component within their life. So a couple of examples here. Someone believes that all dogs are bad since they've had a bad experience when they were a child. So when they got older, they had a new interaction with the dog and it changed their schema to believe not all dogs are bad, just some of them. So the component of accommodation here is the change in perception about dogs due to a new experience with them. So it went from someone believing that all dogs are bad to them having a good interaction with the dog, which changed their schema to believe that not all dogs are bad. So it entirely changes their demeanor around what they're going to do associating to it. Another example, a child knows that clowns have red hair. So when they see someone with red hair, they believe it is a clown. However, with exposure to people with red hair, they begin to realize that not everyone with red hair is a clown. So a child knows that someone has red hair. When they see someone with red hair, they believe it is a clown. They get more exposure to people with red hair. So they begin to believe that not everyone with red hair is a clown. So the accommodation component here is they went from thinking everyone with red hair is a clown to knowing not everyone with red hair has to be a clown. So it's changing how they think and how they operate in the world. One last example, is Phil begins making YouTube videos and offering individual tutoring sessions to help people who are struggling to pass their ASWB exam. Phil begins cutting out watching sports on the weekends to form study groups to reach more people. So Phil begins making YouTube videos and offering individual tutoring sessions to people who are struggling. And he cuts out watching sports on the weekends to do so. So the accommodation here is Phil cuts sports out to host the study groups to reach more people, so his identity changes. So it's kind of a reverse situation here, where it was the person's presentation before and then the change. But in this situation, it's the change. So making the YouTube videos, offering the individual tutoring and study groups. So he cuts out the sports to be able to do so. So now moving on to Kohlberg's theory of moral development, which has 6 stages and 3 levels in it. So level 1 is pre-conventional morality. So this is prior to people being able to, quote unquote, have a conventional life or function in society in an appropriate manner. So stage 1 within level 1, which is pre-conventional morality, is obedience and punishment orientation. So this is where a person behaves in a good manner to avoid being punished. If the person is punished, then they must have done something wrong. So key emphasis on obedience because they're following the rules. And if they do not, they are going to receive punishment. And this can be tokened as pleasure versus pain. Is the pleasure that someone is going to get worth the pain that they are going to experience? So in this stage, the person avoids doing particular behaviors to allow for acceptance from a person of authority. So if they are doing things and following the rules, it's often to get acceptance and to not be punished. So for example, a 4th grade girl refrains from running in the hallway in order to avoid being punished for breaking the school rules. So this person refrains from running in the hallway to avoid being punished for the school rules. So if someone wanted to go against this, they would run in the hallway because they're late to class and they would not care if they got in trouble. So they're willing to sacrifice getting in trouble to get something that they see pleasurable. Another example, a young boy behaves himself in the store to avoid being yelled at by his mother. So behaving in the store to avoid being yelled at. Why? Because he's following the rules to not be punished. Another example, a young child will behave themselves in their relative's house to avoid getting their iPad taken. So behaving themselves at the relative's house. Why? To avoid getting their iPad taken. Again, this is them following the rules to avoid being punished in some way, shape, or form. Stage 2, individualism and exchange, key emphasis on individual, because they are focused on their self in order to gain something from other people. So stated in a different way, a person will recognize there's more than one way of doing something correctly and often will cling onto the response handed down to them by a figure of authority. So different individuals have different rules that they will follow. So the key emphasis is still on that figure of authority, but it is to get acceptance or benefit from that in some way. So these rules are based on their own values and morals and the views of the world, and the interest begins to shift to rewards rather than to avoid being punished. Because remember, the last stage was to avoid being punished. This person is focused on getting rewards because their effort is made to make the greatest possible effort to get the greatest possible rewards for themselves. Key emphasis again on the individual. So that they're willing to exchange something to benefit themselves in some way. So the person will begin to conform their rules or principles to benefit themselves. So a phrase that articulates this: you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. I'll do things that I normally would not do in order to benefit myself in some way, shape, or form off of that. Couple of examples here. The child may help out their parents do dishes even though they do not like doing so in order to have their friend stay the night. So they're going to help their parents do the dishes even though they do not like doing so. That's important in order to have their friends stay the night. So they are willing to do something in exchange to benefit themselves or get a reward, which would be having their friends stay the night. Someone may not want to study for their ASWB exam. However, they know they will have a higher likelihood of doing so if they study. So they may not want to study for it, but they study in order to have a higher likelihood of passing. Again, it's not something that they enjoy, but it's something that they're willing to sacrifice through to benefit themselves in some way. One last example, someone may watch a movie with their significant other, even though they do not want to make them happy. So they may watch the movie with their significant other, even though they do not want to, which is to make that person happy in some way, which again would benefit the person that's doing that if they want their significant other to be happy in some way, which may not be the story for everyone, but in this particular situation, it is. Which, moving on to the second level, conventional morality. So this is most adolescents and adults, but again, people can occupy levels regardless of their age based on the situation and their thought process within it. So within conventional morality, this is where people are going to navigate and be quote unquote more conventional and navigate society as such. So they're going to start wanting acceptance for people as well as being able to follow the rules in some way. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So the person begins to internalize the moral standards or values of the people they consider significant in their life. And authority is also internalized, but not question and reasoning is based on the norms of the group that they occupy. So the person will follow the norms and rules of their culture to get acceptance in some way. So stage 3 is conformity and interpersonal accord. So I'm going to conform to have positive interpersonal relationships or accord. So the individual is good in order to be seen as a good person by others. So they seek the approval of others based on their actions. So they're seeking that approval from other people, regardless of what's going on in their situation. So this is coined the good boy, good girl level because we are being good in order to get acceptance from other people because we place value on having acceptance or being in a sense of community within where we are at. So effort is put forth to secure approval or maintain friendly relations with other people that we have of interest. And of course, that's not us getting acceptance from everybody, but at the end of the day, there's probably a list of people that you have that if they are mad at you, it bothers you in some way, shape, or form. So we start acting in a way that allow for acceptance from people that we deem important and oftentimes will lead to sacrificing one's own morals and values in some way to benefit ourselves in the long run. So all of this is based on the acceptance of other people and to have interpersonal relationships that are positive. So examples here. Stealing is bad, and if I steal, then my friends will consider me a bad person, so I do not steal. So stealing is bad. If I steal, my friends will consider me a bad person, so I do not steal. Why? Because I'd be rejected from my peer group in some way, shape, or form, and we don't want that at all. Someone may think that driving drunk is a bad behavior, so they avoid doing so to ensure people will not consider them a bad person. So someone may think that drinking and driving is bad, so they avoid doing it. Why? To ensure people will not consider them a bad person. Again, it is not rooted in reality all of the times, but if your peer group and people around you are telling it's a behavior that you should be doing, you tend to succumb to it. Another example, I feel unmotivated to study for my ASWB exam, but the people I hang around are studying, so I study to avoid being rejected by them. So I feel unmotivated to study for the ASWB exam, but people around me are studying. So people around me, so I study to avoid being rejected by them. So I may feel pressured to do behaviors that I otherwise would not have done based on the fact of the environment that I'm in. A fourth example, I do not feel like I need to lose weight, but everyone around me is starting to eat healthier. So I begin eating healthier to avoid judgment. So I do not feel personally that I need to lose weight. Everyone around me is starting to eat healthier. So they're making changes I have not. So I begin to eat healthier to avoid getting rejected or judged by them in that environment. So I am sacrificing what I think and what I believe to get acceptance from them in some way, shape, or form. Stage 4, authority and social order. So key emphasis on authority, because we're going to continue to respect authority like we have throughout the previous stages. And then social order. So we want to make sure that order within society is upheld. So the person becomes more aware of the wider rules of society. So judgment is considered with obeying the rules in order to uphold social order and avoid guilt of breaking the rules. So we want to uphold social order and follow the law, regardless of the negative impacts that it could have, or if it's hurting us in some way. So orientation or conduct begins to shift from getting approval from others to more fixed rules. So we go from getting approval from others, which was the previous stage. We want to have positive interpersonal relationships, or we conform to whatever we're told, to more fixed rules, which is the law, because we want society to be harmonious and we follow the law and rules based on that. So the purpose of morality is maintaining the social order and looking to maintain interpersonal accord to compass and benefit the entire society. So within this is going to be benefiting the entire society, but we're looking to also maintain that social order. So we are going to emphasize that social order piece, because if people aren't following the law, then we tend to reject them in some way. So we obey laws and fulfill social obligations and duty to maintain social systems. So regardless of what's going on or the negative impact it could have on us, we follow the law at all cost. Couple of examples here. I am personally against violence, but never protest at the library without permission, because it would be out of what is normally expected and accepted in society. Another example, I'm personally against the attendance policy at work, but will still check with my boss before violating the policy. So I am against the attendance policy, but will check with my boss before violating it, because I would rather have acceptance and follow the attendance policy than benefit myself and do what I have to do within my own life. Another example, I am late for work and feel pressured to speed in my car, but since it is against the law, I continue to drive the speed limit. So I am late for work, so I am feeling frantic and feel pressure to speed. So I'm feeling it internally, like we need to throttle down. I cannot be late to work. People will be mad at me. I'll be rejected. I'll be shunned in some way. But since it is against the law, I continue to drive the speed limit and am willing to accept the rejection of my coworkers based on the fact that I'm late, to appease the overall society or community that I am in. And the majority of society is going to be within those two stages. Level 3, post-conventional morality. This is beyond, or post meaning after what is conventional, because very few people are going to get to stage 5 and 6. And as I go through it, y'all are going to understand why. So stage 5 is a social contract for individual rights. So you have a social contract in your mind to uphold the individual rights of people in some way. So the person becomes aware that while rules are important and exist for the good of the greatest number of people, there are times that they will go against the interests of particular people. Again, we want to follow the rules and laws, but at some points in time, there are people that are being indirectly or directly oppressed based on the laws and rules of society. So since some laws and rules are against the interest of people, an action is needed to dissemble the injustice system of this. Why? Because not everything is always going to be accommodating and be what people need in that time. So people will behave in a manner that will help impact others within their society. Key emphasis within their direct community and society. It's not everybody in the world, it's people that they can directly interact with. So they may step outside of the social norm if it could benefit their community. So if it is going to benefit the greatest number of people in their community or their surrounding area in some way, they are going to do actions to bridge that gap for people. So the issues are not always clean cut within the social system or social work or society in general, and it's a not one size fits all. So therefore, the person will attempt to equalize the gap in a particular area based on what people need. So rather than equality, meaning everyone gets the same thing, they're going to advocate for more equity, which means people get what they want to help equalize the gap and benefit them in their particular situation. So for example, some people are going to need more hands-on educational assistance, but if everyone got the same amount of hands-on educational system, that would be equality. Equity means this person needs a little more assistance to help them maximize their potential. So they're going to get that in some way. But in this particular thing, mutual benefit and reciprocity for everyone that is involved within the change, meaning some people are going to benefit from this, but the person that is doing it is also going to benefit in some way. So morally right and legal do not always equate to the same thing. So even though people are going to benefit, not every single person is going to benefit because, again, it's going to equalize the gap. So it's going with the Altarian rules, which means it makes everything better for everyone based on the fact that you're providing resources and things that could be helpful for the people in some way to help bridge that gap. Because if the resources and things are not there for certain people, they would not be able to get the same results as every other person that has the resources and opportunities given to them. So genuine interest is in the welfare of others and concern with individual rights and being morally correct. But at the end of the day, remember that this stage of social contract means that you have a contract within your particular society and situation and community that you occupy. So you benefit as well because you're in that community. And if you make yourself better or the people around you that don't have that bridged gap, your entire community is going to benefit in some way. So couple of examples to articulate this. Schindler during World War II. So if you all don't know who Schindler is, Schindler created a factory to hire Jewish people in Germany to help them evade the Holocaust and being persecuted in some way. And he didn't do that for the entire country. He did it for the particular surrounding town that he was in to help save them in some way. Again, it was not the law for what he did. He stepped outside the law and said, hey, if I create a factory and hire Jewish workers, they will be able to evade the Holocaust and will make faulty parts. So it can negatively impact the war as well. So he stepped outside of himself, said, how can I help the community that I'm in and bridge that gap so that Jewish people are not being oppressed and discriminated against and executed based on how they identify. The second example is picture a social worker seeing a client that is not scheduled to ensure that they are stable. So as a social worker, I'm sure that you guys have booked schedules. I know I do, as well as clients that have resources and crises. This would be you staying after your normal hours to see a client to make sure that they are benefiting in that way. They are stable in some way. And I'm sure you guys have done this because you guys all have kind hearts. So that's another example. You did not step out and make it wide for the entire world, but you tried benefiting your community based on the fact that you made sure a client got their needs met and that they were stable so the way they did not negatively impact you or anyone else in where you're at. A third example, someone does not have enough food to eat and a restaurant worker gives them extra food even though it is against the rules. Again, this restaurant worker is stepping outside of what is normally acceptable and potentially breaking the rules of his establishment to help benefit people that would not otherwise get their needs met if he were not able to do that. So that would be another way that he's benefiting this community in some way to help bridge that gap, which is again equity. So he or she had a social contract in their mind that they created that said other people are not going to have to be going without based on the fact that we are wasting. And then the last stage is universal principles. Key emphasis on universal, meaning we are focusing on the entire universe, and universal meaning regardless of where you go, we're trying to make an impact in some way. So this person has developed their own set of rules, morals, and guidelines for how things should be ran in society. So again, not everything is going to be benefiting people, but this person said, I'm about to change the entire universe based on the fact that I see that we're not obeying and people are not getting their needs met. So this may or may not align with the law. So human rights, justice, and equality, again, everyone gets the same thing, or equity, people get what they need or deserve. The person is prepared to act and to defend the principles, even if it means going against the rest of society to enforce the overall good and well-being or welfare of the people. And key emphasis on the overall society or good of people. Every single person on the planet is benefiting in some way. So people will behave in a manner that will benefit the entire universe, and they are willing to break rules to do so. They're willing to be imprisoned and incarcerated to get the job done. So they will attempt to make new universal rules to benefit every single person on the planet. So the person is willing to pay consequences for their actions of disapproval, which could again mean imprisonment. And if you can imagine, very few people are willing to get to this level of dedication to the overall society or have this level of thinking, if you will. So a couple of examples of this, Martin Luther King Jr. So when he was doing his civil rights movements and advocating based on the equity or equality of people, he was willing to be incarcerated, willing to go through persecution and different things to advocate for the equality of every single person on the planet, regardless of race, gender, etc., propelling and putting himself in sacrificial situations to benefit every single person. Another example, Gandhi, when there were being oppressed in his country, he was willing to fast, he was willing to advocate, and it created a world exposure to the conditions that they were living under and how they were being indirectly harmed and directly harmed, which flagged down the rest of the world to jump in and say, we need to do something because people are being oppressed and discriminated against and persecuted based on things outside of their control. Another example is John Q, which is the Denzel movie, which was where his son needed an operation, but based on his insurance and the fact that he was in poverty, they were not going to do the operation. So we held the hospital hostage in order for him to get his son's operation and treatment that he needed. He was willing to put his life and be imprisoned for the fact that he wanted his son to have life, which again directly impacted other people's ability to get medical services regardless of the amount of money that they made or the insurance coverage that they had. Again, they were willing to put their life on the line, just not for their community, but every single person that could possibly be encountered or navigate that system after them. So that is Kohlberg's moral development. So we will go on to Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. So mnemonics to remember the stages here, we're going to be looking at trust, autonomy to initiate the industry, identify intimacy, and generate integrity. So trust, autonomy, we have initiate for initiative, industry, identify or identity, intimacy, and then generate or generativity, and then integrity for the last phase. And then we have mistrust, shame, guilt, and inferiority cause role confusion and make someone isolate from stagnation, which can lead to despair. So trust versus mistrust. We have autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, and then we have generativity versus stagnation, and then we have integrity versus despair. So those are just two mnemonics to remember the different stages to combine it on your exam. So let's get into the particulars of what each stage means. So we have trust versus mistrust, which is from 0 to 1 years old. So this is when the child begins to gain confidence and to build trust based on the feedback from their caregivers. So this stage is all based on survival and what can possibly be helpful for them. So if the child is very questionable of what others will do for them and they're unsure whether they'll get their needs met. So if a child in this age bracket has their needs met, they're able to build a sense of trust with caregivers and other people that if they have a need, that they will get it met, and they will start building close connections with the people around them. Because with repetition and things getting done, you start to build patterns and start to build trust with other people. So this is where the child will keep a close connection to their parent or caregiver. And if it is not met, then they will have to adapt and overcome and figure out ways for them to get their needs met in some way, shape, or form. So within each stage, there's going to be a positive or success or negative or failure. So if it's a positive and success, security and confidence in their ability to maintain safety is established. So if a child is getting their needs met consistently, and if they have a caregiver or parent there to look out for them, they will start having a sense of safety within that environment and look to that parent or caregiver for some type of feedback. So the child is able to understand that their parent or caregiver will be there for them and take care of their needs. Or on the other side of the token, if a child is not getting their needs met, they will have a sense of fear around the world, which can cause heightened anxiety. So if you're consistently having to do things on your own and not having support from other people, it could lead to you wanting to isolate and have mistrust for people as well as the environments that you occupy and put yourself in. So the child is unsure whether they can trust their caregiver or parent to take care of their needs. And that's where attachment issues could start forming. So if I'm not getting my needs met consistently, or I'm not sure if they're going to get met, I'm going to start having mistrust for people that say they're going to be there for me to help me in some way, which could then lead us down a negative path. The second stage is autonomy versus shame. And this is from 1 to 3 years old. So in this stage, the child begins to roam away from their parent or caregiver, yet they keep them close by for security. So autonomy, key emphasis on freedom. So if someone has autonomy, they're able to move about as they would, but they're still looking for that caregiver for security as well as feedback in some way. So the child begins to assert independence by walking away from their caregiver and parent and making decisions such as picking out their clothing, food, what activities they want, and what preferences they have. But at the end of the day, they're going to fall back on their parent for feedback based on what their choice is, which could lead to them having more confidence in the future if they receive positive feedback. If they receive no feedback or no feedback in general, they could lead to having shame or codependency in the future. So in the absence of the parent or caregiver providing feedback, the child will begin to adapt and make decisions for themselves or cling to other people to make decisions for them, which could then lead them down to a negative path if the decisions that the people that are telling them they should do are not the most positive for them. So if someone is given the autonomy or freedom to go about and given the choices and receive positive feedback based on what they're doing, they're going to have less shame. But if they're demeaned or not giving guidance at all, or have to depend on other people and receive negative feedback for what they're doing, they're going to form shame. So they're going to have mistrust and shame about themselves, which could lead to more negative outcomes. So success or positive here is where the child gains a sense of confidence in their abilities to choose what is best for them. So the child is starting to make decisions for themselves and will work towards operating on themselves or being able to operate and navigate their system based on what works for them. So the child knows what they can try. And when they try new things, they have that parent or caregiver to fall back on, or the feedback that they receive from the parent or caregiver that is positive, which can help them build more successful attempts in the future. Negative or failure is where the child begins to feel anxious and unsure of their abilities and may rely on others for reassurance around them or what they're capable of. So if someone is always demeaning somebody and saying that they're never going to amount to anything or that they're just stupid or can't complete things, they're going to have less confidence and more shame in their abilities, and they're going to start questioning what they're able to do and depend on other people to tell them what to do. So that way they don't have to own the feedback and situation. So the child will become more confused when put into a situation where they have to decide for themselves. So if someone doesn't have the experience or exposure of making decisions for themselves, when they get that option, it's going to feel uncomfortable for them. And they're just going to chameleon themselves into the decision that other people tell them in some way. So the next stage is initiative versus guilt, which is from 3 to 6 years old. So this is where a child begins to plan activities for themselves and will begin to share or play with other children. So they start to take initiative in their situation based on the fact of the people that are around them, and they start getting into the project realm. So the child begins to engage with others in attempts to seek out friendships and form relationships outside of their family in some way. So the child will begin starting a complete task on their own and develop a sense of accomplishment around their efforts. So if someone's taking initiative, they're planning something out, carrying out the plan and seeing how it goes. And if it goes well, they'll have a higher sense of accomplishment and confidence in their ability. And the child will begin to explore different activities, engage their interest around it. So at this age, they're going to be trying a ton of different things to develop what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and things that they don't work, they kind of just shed off. So positive or success in this, so the child develops a sense of confidence in their abilities to engage and fit in with other people. So if they take initiative and it's recognized and positively accepted, they're going to be more confident in doing it in the future. So the child will develop a connection and relationship with other people, and the child will perform actions on their own, which allows for them to increase their level of independence in some way. A negative or failure or guilt in this sense would be where the child questions their abilities to engage with others and may isolate themselves or become easily angered, anxious, or depressed based on the fact that they're not being accepted or that they're not sure what they should do. So it just has that heightened response of, in, is what I'm doing actually what I should be doing? So the child will then fall back and depend on others to guide them, and that they may believe that they're a nuisance or that what they're doing is not what they're supposed to be doing, and that they just don't simply quote unquote want to bother anybody, or that what they did is not their best product, but it's just a product of the environment that they were put in. So they fall back on the opinion of others. So if people tell them that they're smart and intelligent, they may question it and think what the person's motive is. And then the next stage, industry versus inferiority, is from 6 to 12 years old. So this is where the child begins to develop a sense of pride around their accomplishments, and the child will initiate projects and see them through completion. So before they are initiating things, maybe not completing it, but just kind of get an exposure to what will work for them comparative to what actually they can do. So the child will then seek out peer relationships based on similar interests to gain a sense of connection with others. So it's a continuation of taking initiative, but this is getting more niched in to what could be working with and for you. So this is where you start getting into relationships based on similar interest areas. So the child will begin to take on projects in particular areas of interest to advance their skill level to work towards mastery. Again, the previous stages were just getting exposure to this. Industry, think about an assembly line, you start becoming more technical and skilled in the things that you are interested in. So you get around similar people. So that way you can navigate and build things bigger. So the child is able to work effectively with others and are able to follow rules rather than controlling their situation. Prior situations, you were taking initiative, being your own boss. Industry, you kind of fall back into that assembly line and figure out what will work for you, what will not work for you. So if done adequately, you will have a sense of accomplishment, industry, being able to build up your own situation. So a positive or success, the child is able to make connections with others and take a sense of pride in the projects that they complete. So the child's confidence is increased in the continuation of their mission of independence ensues. So the child will begin to feel productive and see a sense of drive when they are working on their goals. And if they're not, they're going to have that sense of inferiority or feel inferior to the people around them based on the fact that they're just falling back into what's comfortable and what people are telling them to do. So the negative or failure side would be where the child begins to feel less than or inferior to their counterparts and will doubt their ability to complete basic tasks based on the fact that they didn't have that positive reinforcement or people telling them that they can do it. So in this situation, the child will begin to isolate themselves from their peers and feel like they are less than them, which will cause them to isolate and engage with peers who are not as positive for them. So the child will have increased anxiety around other people and not have confidence in their ability to do so. So in that, if you continue falling down the negative path at this point, they'll have mistrust, shame, they have guilt, and they feel inferior to the counterparts. So then the next stage is identity versus role confusion. So this is when someone will seek out tasks that they normally would not do to begin to develop a sense of what works for them and what does not. So this is the culmination of creating an identity and try to find your strengths and weaknesses, what could actually work best for you and what you want to see for the rest of your life. So someone will, for example, someone will join a football team when they have never tried it to see if they like it and if they are actually good at it. So this is going to be a lot of trial and error of what you like and what you don't like. So if you picture back around from 12 to 18, you're looking at like 8th grade until senior in high school, if not freshman in college. So this is where you're uncertain of what you actually want to see for yourself and trying multiple different things. And then the intention is to figure out and fall into what you can actually do and honing in your skills and positives and strengths. So this is to see what the person is capable of versus what they would like to see for themselves, which at times does not equal. So for example, I am not physically gifted, so I'm not like a LeBron James who it's like 6'8", 250. So the chances of me going into the NBA or NFL is very unlikely. But somebody that has that structure has the higher likelihood of being able to do it because that's their capability. But at the end of the day, you have to hone in what works for you and find the things that you're good at and shut off the things that you're not good at. So the person is able to work with others and connect with other people that are interested in that particular interest area to become more expertise and gain an expertise. So for example, all y'all are in the social work field, so you guys surround yourself with people that are intelligent in the social work field. They're doing things that you want to do to be able to do that in the future. So same thing with this group of people or this age bracket, you get and surround yourself with similar people with the intentions of advancing the things that you are good at to become better off. So positive or success in this stage would be someone will identify a specific path that they would like to take in life, such as a career, social groups, and economic situation, etc. The person will identify who they are and what they would like to see in their future. Again, this can change, but this is where the person starts to have that identity and seeing what works for them and what doesn't. And negative or failure in this stage would be someone who does not develop a sense of identity and relies on other people to tell them what is best for them, or they're unsure of their purpose. So when you're unsure of your purpose, you'll accept anything. So the person will mold themselves to any expectation that people place on them. So kind of chameleoning yourself into different environments just for the sole fact that you want to be accepted in some way. So you're confused about the identity that you want to have, and it's all about being accepted by other people at this point. And then the next stage is intimacy versus isolation. So this is from 18 to 40 years old. So this is where someone will begin to seek out relationships or connections with people beyond their family and in a more intimate lens. So someone will practice what they would like to see for themselves in life. So someone will do a lot of experimenting or isolating themselves from other people. So the person will attempt to develop relationships and connections beyond their immediate family members, which will mean that they seek out an intimate partner as well as a community that they can trust innately. So the whole fact is intimacy or getting a sense of community or love from other people to end up benefiting yourself in some way. So a positive or success in this stage would be someone feels comfortable seeking and maintaining relationships, can accept rejection from other people when it occurs, and the person is able to think about other people and not just about themselves. They're trying to promote and create a community that would be benefiting from all of the actions from the other people. And a negative or failure here is where someone has a sense of self-doubt and that they think that they are not worthy of people's affection or attention. So they do not belong with other people. So they started to isolate. So they lack a sense of connection in areas they deem important and they avoid intimacy at all costs. So if it does occur, they put up their walls, they put up boundaries and barriers to have people just leave them in innately. So the person will feel lonely and anxious and depressed. The person may find themselves in codependent relationships and or being used by other people because they don't know their worth and what a positive relationship will look like. They just want people to be around them in some way, shape, or form. And then the next stage is generativity versus stagnation, which is from 40 to 65 years old. So this is where the person begins to establish a career and settle down with their family. So they develop a sense of being a part of something that is bigger than them. And they develop a family network of people that they show pride in being a part of. So this is where they try generating what they deem as important. So that way they can start contributing to the world. So the person begins to develop ways to advance the lives of others and thinks outside of themselves to do so. So the person believes that they are capable of more and want to empower those around them to have a better life and outlook for things. And they start to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of other people because they feel like they want to leave things behind rather than just leaving things for themselves and benefiting themselves. So a positive or success here would be when someone will have a fulfilling career and happy home life. So the person will have developed positive connections with people that they are happy to know. So they are attempting to empower the next generation in their family or the next generation within the community in some way. So they will continue to give back to others in a healthy manner because they want to generate as much positivity as they possibly can. A negative or failure here is when someone does not value what they do and feel like they're not contributing to society enough. So the person lacks a sense of self esteem and connection with others. So the person will have anxiety and depression symptoms based on the fact that they feel that they're not meeting the roles that they had set in their mind or what other people told them was important. So the person will avoid any opportunity to be a part of the community because they do not feel worthy enough to be able to do so. So they overcompensate and try to buy affection or love in some way, just based on the fact that they feel that they're not enough. So they try to supplement in some way. And then the last stage is integrity versus despair, which is ages 65 and older. So this is where the person starts to slow down productivity and begins to reflect on their life's work and accomplishments. So the person will begin to reflect on their life and deem it to be worthwhile or like they could have done more. So two ends of the spectrum. If someone feels that they've done enough, they will have integrity. If they feel that they haven't done enough and that they did negative things in life, they're going to feel despair. So this is where the person will explore their accomplishments or wrongdoings and absorb the feelings surrounding it. So they have that reflection within inside themselves. Did what I do in society enough, or did my career bring fulfillment in some way? So positive or success here is when someone feels like they have done, has helped advance their career field as well as has empowered and enabled other people to do the same thing that they had destined to do in their life. So they take pride in their efforts and strive to do more because they're more motivated within their situation to get the job done. And the person continues to grow and develop themselves in the best version of themselves. So negative or failure is where someone feels like what they have done is not enough and like they've wasted their time and potential in some way. So this is where the person will experience a lot of self-doubt, regret, resentment, and the person will stop growing and start degrading in some way. So the person will start feeling like their life was wasted and what is the point? So they have that despair piece and start negatively beating up on themselves and negative self-talk, etc. So mnemonics for the age groups to remember Stage 1 starts at 0 and ends at 1. Stage 2 is between 1 and 3 because it ends at 3. And stage 3 starts at 3 and ends on the double, so it's 3 to 6. Stage 4, the industry starts at 6 and breaks at 12 because it's 6 to 12. Stage 5, adolescence, is when identity is confusing. So that is where 12 to 18. Stage 6, 18 to 40 is a lovely time to isolate. So 18 to 40, intimacy versus isolation. Stage 7, if you generate enough from 0 to 40, you can 40 to 65, you can retire. Stage 8, at 65, you have integrity and avoid despair. So those are easy ways to remember the different ages for the different stages and to keep yourself motivated and driving throughout the entire thing. So those are the different human developmental theories, PJ, Kohlberg, and Erickson's. Question 1. A social worker at a family agency is working with a couple and their 5-year-old son. The couple reports that their son has been more distant from them and has been engaging in activities that he previously had no interest in. The child often only comes to the parents to show them a project that he has completed. The parents report that they feel like bad parents since their child no longer wants to spend time with them. Which psychosocial developmental stage best explains the child's behavior? A, initiative versus guilt. B, identity versus role confusion. C, intimacy versus isolation. D, industry versus inferiority. When you have your answer, type water into the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Slapping the polls shut. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. So, a social worker, family agency, working with a couple and their 5-year-old son. Couple reports their son has been more distant and has been engaging in activities that he previously had no interest in. And the child often only comes to the parents to show them a project that they have completed. And the parents report that they feel like bad parents and that the child no longer wants to spend time with them. So we will go over the ages and then break it down based on the stages description. So initiative versus guilt is 3 to 6 years old. Identity versus role confusion is 12 to 18 years old. Intimacy versus isolation is 18 to 40 years old. And then industry versus inferiority, 6 to 12 years old. So quick review, family agency, couple, 5-year-old son. Couple reports the son has been more distant and engaged in activities that he previously had no interest. He'll only come to them to show them what he has done, and then kind of filler, they feel like bad parents. So we are going to rule out intimacy versus isolation. Why? Because intimacy versus isolation is where you're looking for an intimate partner and connections with outside the family. So in this particular situation, this 5-year-old's not trying to find an intimate partner and is not trying to find connection outside of them. They're just roaming away from the parents and completing tasks. We're also going to rule out identity versus role confusion because he's not really trying to find a sense of identity. Yeah, he's roaming away from the parents and trying to figure out what works for him and what doesn't. But at the end of the day, he's still coming back to the parents and saying, hey, look what I've done. What do you think about it? Have I done what I'm supposed to? What do you think? So that leads us to initiative versus guilt. Is he trying to take initiative within a situation, or is he in that industry phase where he's getting together with other kids, kind of finding that assembly line and figuring out a niche in his particular interest area? At this time, we're going to rule out D because industry would mean that he's trying to really get things accomplished and start doing systematic tasks and all that. So we're going to go with A, initiative versus guilt, because the kid is simply taking initiative within his life, figuring out what works for him and what doesn't. But he's coming to them and showing them the particular thing that he's done. So he's taking initiative, wondering what the feedback that the parents have, and then going back and trying new things with and for his situation. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 2. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is meeting with the 22-year-old female for a recent larceny charge. The woman reports that she was just trying to get money for rent so she and her boyfriend would not get evicted. The woman reports that she feels guilty for what she has done and has been experiencing increased amounts of anxiety since her boyfriend will no longer talk with her. The woman feels the social worker can help her gain the skills to get her boyfriend back. Which stage of psychosocial development would you say this woman is in? A, identity versus role confusion. B, autonomy versus shame. C, initiative versus guilt. D, intimacy versus isolation. And when you have your answer, type the word steal in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Closing the polls down. The majority think it is D. Second place is C. Third place is A. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. So we have a social worker, outpatient clinic, 22-year-old female. She has a recent larceny charge. So the woman reports that she was just trying to get money for rent, so her and her boyfriend did not get evicted. The woman reports she feels guilty for what she's done and has been experiencing increased amounts of anxiety, so a negative mental health symptomology. The boyfriend will no longer communicate with her. The one feels like the social worker can help her get her boyfriend back. Good luck. Which stage of psychosocial development would you say that she is in? So we'll break it down based on the ages and then utilize the stage description to get the answer. Identity versus role confusion, 12 to 18 years old. Autonomy versus shame, 1 to 3 years old. Initiative versus guilt, 3 to 6 years old. Intimacy versus isolation, 18 to 40 years old. So, quick review: outpatient clinic, 22-year-old female, larceny charge, trying to get money for rent. Her and her boyfriend would not get evicted. The woman reports she feels guilty, increased amount of anxiety. Boyfriend no longer wants to speak with her. So, we're going to take out B, autonomy versus shame. Yeah, she was trying to get some freedom financially within this situation, but she went around it the wrong way, and her motives aren't based on the fact that she's trying to experiment with what works for her and then going back to a caregiver or parent. At this time, we're going to take initiative versus guilt. Yeah, she's taking initiative within her situation, trying to own it, but she also did a legal charge, and it was motivated based on the fact that her relationship was on the forefront of what she would like to see with and for herself. So it's not going to be initiative versus guilt. So at this time, we're looking at identity versus role confusion. Is she trying to figure out what type of identity she wants to see for herself and getting connections with people based on similar interests? Or is she motivated by intimacy and making connections outside of her family in this situation? So we're going to rule out identity versus role confusion. Yeah, she's pretty confused based on the fact of what she is and who she is, but it's motivated based on the fact that she has an intimate connection with her boyfriend and she feels guilt around it, knows it was wrong, but she did want to get evicted and negatively impact the relationship. And now that the relationship is end, she's experiencing negative mental health symptoms or decreased mental health symptoms. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 3. Social worker at a family agency is working with a couple and their 12-year-old son who has been skipping school to smoke marijuana. The parents report they've tried putting their son in many different activities, yet he's not been interested in any of them. The boy reports that he feels like his parents are too much and they need to chill out. The boy reports that he has started to hang around people he feels comfortable around. What psychosocial stage of development is the boy in? A, identity versus role confusion. B, industry versus inferiority. C, social conformity versus individual. D, initiative versus guilt. When you have your answer, type the word slow in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is C and D. Let's look at it. Social worker, family agency, couple, 12-year-old son. Son has been skipping school to smoke marijuana. The parents report that they've been putting their son in many different activities. He's not interested in any of them. Boy reports he feels like his parents are too much and they just need to chill out. The boy reports he has started to hang around people he feels comfortable around. So let's break it down based on the ages and then use the stages to answer the question. So identity versus role confusion, 12 to 18 years old. Industry versus inferiority, 6, 12 years old. Social conformity versus individual. Phil made this up. So that is not going to be an answer. And then initiative versus guilt is 3 to 6 years old. So quick review. Social worker, family agency, couple, 12-year-old son, skipping school to smoke marijuana. Parents are trying to tell him what activities he should do, not interested in any of them, and the parents just need to chill out. So based on that, we're going to rule out social conformity versus individual because I made that one up. So it can't possibly be an answer because it's not a part of psychosocial stages of development. So at this time, we're also going to rule out initiative versus guilt. Yeah, he's taking initiative and trying to take control within a situation and figure out what works for him, what doesn't work for him. But it's not based on the fact that he's trying to get experience and exposure and trying to get acceptance in some way within a situation and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't in that type of way. Yeah, he's doing behaviors that he feels necessary, fighting back against the parents. The parents would be providing positive feedback rather than the negative that he is feeling, and he's not reporting any guilt as well. We're going to rule out industry versus inferiority because in that stage, you'd be looking for accomplishments and trying to figure out and follow the rules and navigate with different people. Yeah, he's trying to find some social connection, but it's not based on the fact that he's just trying to get operational and do that kind of assembly line type deal and get around people that have similar interest and accomplish things. He's doing identity versus role confusion because he's trying to figure out what identity that he wants to see for himself, what peers he wants to get in. And it's solely driven on connection with other people, not accomplishing anything, not trying to see what developmentally is appropriate. He's just trying to get connection with other people and create an identity that he would like to see for himself in the future. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 4. A child is 5 years old and has been having behavioral problems when engaging with their parents. The child will often demand their parents to do things for them when it is not entirely possible. Last week, the child had an episode of anger in the grocery store because their parents would not buy them a teddy bear. Which cognitive developmental stage would you say this child is in? A, sensory motor, B, pre-operational, C, concrete operational, D, formal operational. When you have your answer, type the word Teddy into the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is A. No one picked D. Let's look at it. So we have a 5-year-old child been having behavioral issues when engaging with their parents. The child will often demand things that their parent is not entirely possible at the given moment. And last week, the child had an episode of anger in the grocery store where they wanted a teddy bear. So we'll break it down based on the ages and then answer with the stages. So sensory motor is 0 to 2 years old. Pre-operational, 2 to 7 years old. And then concrete operational, 7 to 11 years old. And then formal operational is 11 years old and beyond. So quick review, 5-year-old child, behavioral problems with the parents. They're demanding things out of their parents that aren't entirely possible. Kid had an angry outburst for a teddy bear in the grocery store last week. So at this time, we're going to rule out sensory motor because she is utilizing the senses and motor activity to navigate the environment, but it's a little more than that. And he's getting hyper aggressive and demanding things and wanting things out of the situation at this given time. It's not going to be sensory motor because the kid is going to be more interested about the sensors and utilizing the motor activity to get acquainted to their environment. At this time, we're going to rule out formal operational because formal operational, they'd be able to formally think about situations, be able to navigate the system and say, I'm not able to do that this given time because of X, Y, or Z. And when they're provided actual evidence, they're able to analyze and accept it rather than rebuke it. And regardless of what they're told, still intuitively and egocentrically respond. So I either have pre-operational, meaning they're prior to being operational and able only make decisions based on egocentric and intuitive thinking and only have thinking based on symbols and association that way, or concrete operational where they're able to do conservation and classification and be able to have exposure and experience based on objects and think that way. At this time, we're going to rule out concrete operational because they're not utilizing any of those skills and they're more in this situation demanding things out of their parents when it's not entirely possible. So that egocentric rationale and intuitively thinking based on the fact that how they feel rather than the evidence in the situation that they're in. So pre-operational because it's prior to being operational because they only think about themselves. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. Social worker at an outpatient clinic has been working with a 15-year-old boy for 1 month. The boy engaged in services per requirement of probation for stealing video games from the game store. The boy's been working on impulse control with the social worker. In the most recent session, the boy asked the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl he likes. He explains to the social worker that if he asks out the girl, then they may not be friends any longer. Which cognitive developmental stage best explains the boy's thought process? A, concrete operational. B, pre-operational. C, formal operational. D, sensory motor. When you have your answer, type the word kicked into the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Closing down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is A. Third place is B. No one thought D. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic, 15-year-old boy, 1 month. Any length of time, jump on it, paints the picture. The boy engaged in services per requirement for probation for stealing video games from the game store. Boy's been working on impulse control with the social worker. So that's the objective. The boy asks the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl he likes. He explains to the social worker if he asks her out, then he may no longer be friends with them. Which cognitive developmental stage is it? So we'll break it down based on the ages and then utilize the stages to answer the question. So concrete operational, 7 to 11 years old. Pre-operational, 2 to 7 years old. Formal operational, 11 years old and beyond. And then sensory motor is 0 to 2 years old. So quick review, outpatient clinic, 15-year-old boy, 1 month, engaged in services per requirement for stealing video games. He's been working on impulse control. Asks the social worker what he should do when asking out a girl he likes, and he explains to the social worker if you ask out the girl, then they may not be any friends any longer. So we can automatically rule out D and B, because D is utilizing your senses and motor activity to understand the environment and figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And B is not being able to have the thinking beyond yourself as well as feelings based type thinking. So it's not based on that. So we have concrete operational, you being able to think within the use of symbols, or C, formal operational, where you're able to use hypothetical deductive reasoning, meaning if then this, and you're able to think more in the gray rather than black and white. So in this particular situation, the boy has said that he wants to ask out a girl, and he says, if I ask her out, then we'll no longer be friends. So the thinking is more formal and abstract and able to think, if I do this, then this possible situation will happen. A is more based on the fact of symbols and what could work for them or what people have told them. So we're going to rule out A because it's not utilizing classification, conservation, or anything like that. It's utilizing if then this type rationale and being able to abstractly think about situations and cause and effect type relationships. So the answer here is formal operational because you're able to formally develop a plan so that way you can get operational in a particular situation that you want to see. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 6. A social worker at a middle school is meeting with a 17-year-old boy who was recently caught trying to steal food from the cafeteria. The boy reports that his family does not have a lot of money and that he was stealing to help provide food for his family. The boy understands that stealing is wrong, but also feels like his family's health is more important than following the rules. What stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? A, authority and social order. B, social contract and individual rights. C, universal principles. D, individualism and exchange. When you have your answer, type the word bread in the chat. Opening the polls. 30 more seconds. Slapping the polls shut. The majority think it is B. Close second is C. Close third is A. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. So we're in a middle school, meeting with the 17-year-old boy who's recently caught trying to steal food from the cafeteria. The boy reports his family does not have a lot of money and he was stealing food to help provide for them. He understands that stealing is wrong, but feels like their health is more important than following the rules. So, what stage of moral development best explains the boy's motives? So, let's peel back each stage. So, authority and social order is when someone becomes aware of the societal laws and avoids breaking them to conform with their identified social group. Social contract and individual rights, when someone attempts to benefit a particular group of people, regardless of the rules and regulations set in place. Universal principles, when someone sets to change the rules by implementing their own set of rules that are beyond what society has established, with the goal of benefiting the entire universe. Individualism in exchange, when someone recognizes that there is more than one way of doing something and they tend to conform to whatever way will benefit them the most. Quick review. We're a social worker in a middle school, 17-year-old boy caught stealing food from the cafeteria. He did it because his family does not have a lot of money and he wants to provide food for them. He understands that it's wrong, but also feels like his family's health is more important than following the rules. So at this given time, we're going to rule out A, because A would say, I know stealing is wrong, so I'm not going to do it. My family's health is not that important. We're also going to rule out D, individualism versus exchange. Yeah, he is trying to exchange himself to benefit other people, but not to benefit himself in some way. So he's not doing something that he doesn't enjoy to benefit himself. He's actually trying to benefit other people outside of himself. So it's kind of a deeper level of thinking. So do we want to have social contract and individual rights where we try to write our own social contract to benefit a particular group of people or a particular community? Or do we want to impact the entire universe and have universal food distribution? So at this time, we're going to rule out C because he's not impacting the entire universe. He's only trying to impact his family, which is a small group of people in his community. So the correct answer here is social contract and individual rights, because he's writing his own contract to benefit individuals in his community, aka his family, to get food in some way, shape, or form, irregardless of breaking the rules and regulations. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 7. Social workers meeting with a 24-year-old female who reports feeling excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. The woman reports that she accepted additional job responsibilities because one of her supervisors that she likes asked her to do so. The woman reports that she does not know how much extra work it would have caused her to do, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits that she could get from helping out her supervisor. What stage of moral development best explains the woman's behavior? A, individualism and exchange. B, authority and social order. C, social contract and individual right. D, conformity and interpersonal accord. When you have your answer, type the word mince into the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Close second is D. Third place is B and C. Let's look at it. Social worker meeting with a 24-year-old female reports feeling excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. Woman reported that she accepted additional job responsibilities because one of her supervisors that she likes asked her to do so. The woman reports that she did not know how much extra work it would cause her to do, so she was unaware, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits she could get from helping out her supervisor. What stage of moral development best explains the woman's behavior? So, individualism and exchange, when someone recognizes that there is more than one way of doing things, yet they cling onto the ways that will benefit them in some way based on the perception of someone they look up to. So, someone of authority, authority and social order, when someone becomes aware of the societal laws and avoids breaking them to conform to the societal and social norms. And then social contract and individual rights. When someone attempts to benefit a particular group of people regardless of the rules and regulations set in place. Conformity and interpersonal accord. When someone will avoid doing a particular behavior for fear that they will be isolated from a group in some way. Quick review: 24-year-old female, excessive amounts of anxiety while at work. She accepted additional job responsibilities because the supervisor she liked asked her to do so. She reports she did not know how much extra work it would be, but did not want to miss out on any additional benefits that she could get from the supervisor in some way, shape, or form. So at this given time, we're going to rule out social contract and individual rights because she's not trying to benefit any group of people or go against the law based on that there's some equality issues or equity issues, and she's not trying to bridge a gap in any way, shape, or form. She is trying to sacrifice herself in some way, but it's beyond just trying to benefit people outside of her. She's actually gaining benefit herself. We're also going to rule out authority and social order because it's not saying she's trying to comply with the actual societal law or she's trying to avoid breaking laws for the fact that she would be isolated or ostracized in some way. So, is she trying to sacrifice her individual preference to gain something in some way to benefit herself? Or is she doing this solely based on the fact that she doesn't want to be isolated or cut out of a peer group, or it could negatively impact her interpersonal relationships in some way? And a key detail in the question is that she's trying to gain any additional benefit. So she's trying to benefit herself in the most maximized type. So we're going to rule out conformity versus interpersonal accord because, yeah, she's trying to get acceptance from the supervisor but it's not based on the fact that she wants her acceptance. It's based on the fact that I want your acceptance and I want to benefit myself in some way, shape, or form. And if I appease the supervisor, I could probably get gains in the long-term future. So I'm going to do individualism versus exchange because I will do this for you and you'll do something for me in the future. So that's how we look at that question in particular. I'm doing something that I don't like to get a reward that I would like to get in the future. Question 8. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old woman who has been experiencing increased amounts of depression within the past 4 months. The woman reports that she had an affair with her best friend's husband and has been kicked out of her peer groups for doing so. The woman reports that she knows what she has done is wrong, but continue with the behavior anyway. What stage of moral development did the woman violate the norms of A, individualism and exchange, B, authority and social order, C, obedience and punishment orientation, D, conformity and interpersonal accord? When you have your answer, type the word happy into the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is D. Second place is A and C. Third place is B. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic, completing an intake assessment. So first time meeting them, 35-year-old female, experiencing increased amounts of depression within the last 4 months. Any length of time, jump on it because it creates context in some way. Woman reports she had an affair with her best friend's husband and has been kicked out of her peer group for doing so. So some social rejection in some way, shape, or form. And the one reports she knows what she has done is wrong, but continue with the behavior anyway. So let's break down the particular stages. So individualism versus exchange. When someone recognizes that there is more than one way of doing things, yet cling to the one, clings to the way that will get them the most amount of benefit. Authority and social order. When someone becomes aware of the societal laws and rules, and they avoid breaking them at all cost, and they conform to their social group. Obedience and punishment orientation. When someone will avoid doing a task to avoid being punished in some way. So they know that they can get in trouble for a behavior, so they don't do it. And then conformity and interpersonal accord. When someone will avoid doing a particular behavior and fear that they will be isolated or rejected from their peer group in some way. Quick review, outpatient clinic, intake assessment, first time meeting them, 35-year-old female, increased amount of depression. It's been going on for 4 months. She had an affair with her best friend's husband, kicked out of her peer groups. She knew what she was doing was wrong. She throttled down and did it anyway. So at this time, we're going to rule out B because she's not breaking any laws or regulations or anything, because it's not a written rule that having an affair is an illegal offense. So that wouldn't be correct. And she wasn't trying to avoid saving the society from having any discord because this was in her own personal life. Societal or social order is the entire community. We are going to rule out individualism and exchange because she's not doing things that she didn't enjoy to get some type of benefit. Yeah, she did benefit herself, but she did a behavior that she wanted to do rather than sacrificing herself to get some pleasure in some way, shape, or form. So at this time, she didn't violate that because it's what she wanted to do. So she made the choice to do this behavior and she still got a benefit. If she did a behavior she didn't want to do and still got a benefit, that'd be a different story. So she didn't sacrifice her individual in exchange for something else. She didn't scratch someone's back to get her back scratched eventually. So did we do obedience and punishment orientation? So she avoided doing a behavior so that way she didn't get punished, or did she do a behavior so she could be punished in some way? Or did she avoid doing a behavior in order to not get isolated from her peer group, or did she do a behavior knowingly that she would be kicked out of her peer group in some way? So these are very, very similar options, but she didn't disobey because she wanted to be punished, or she didn't do a behavior that she thought would be pleasurable in order to sacrifice the pain that she would have. So we're going to rule out obedience and punishment orientation because, yeah, she did a behavior that was pleasurable for her in exchange for some pain in some way, but She did a behavior that knew that would get her kicked out of her peer group, but she did it anyway, and now is depressed based on that. So the correct answer here is conformity and interpersonal accord, because she did not conform to her social group's norms. So that way she has poor interpersonal relationships now because she was cut out and isolated from her peer groups in some way, shape, or form. So that's how we look at that question in particular, because she continued with the behavior anyway. So it was a known choice that she would be isolated from the peer group, but she did it anyhow. Question 9. A social worker at a high school meets with a 16-year-old boy who was referred by his teacher for making fun of another classmate for messing up during a presentation. The boy reports that he feels super guilty and embarrassed for making fun of his classmate. The boy begins discussing how all of his friends are going to think he's a bully and how they will no longer want to be around him. The boy reports that he is struggling with impulse and often finds himself getting into trouble. What stage of moral development best explains the boy's concerns? A. Obedience and punishment orientation. B. Conformity and interpersonal accord. C. Authority and social order. D. Social contract and individual rights. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to next week. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. Social worker working with a high school. 16-year-old boy is the client, referred by teacher for making fun of another classmate during a presentation. Boy reports he feels super guilty and embarrassed for making fun of the classmate. The boy begins discussing how his friends are going to think he's a bully and how longer they will no longer want him around. And the boy reports he struggles with impulse and finds himself getting into trouble. So let's break down the particular stages and then go from there. So obedience and punishment orientation, when someone will avoid doing a particular behavior to avoid being punished from someone of authority. Conformity and interpersonal accord, when someone will avoid doing a particular behavior to avoid being isolated from their peer group. An authority and social order, when a person will become aware of societal laws and rules and avoids breaking them to conform with their preferred social group. And then social contract and individual rights, when someone will attempt to benefit a particular group of people by filling the gaps of equality or equity in some way. So if something's not how they want to, they'll look back and change it. So quick review: high school social worker, 16-year-old boy, teacher referred him for making fun of another classmate during a presentation. He feels super guilty and embarrassed for making fun of the classmate. He starts discussing how all of his friends are going to think he's a bully and how they will no longer be around him. And the boy reports that he struggles with impulse and often finds himself getting into trouble. So at this given time, we're going to rule out authority and social order because he didn't break any rules in particular. He didn't break any laws, so he's not going against that. So he didn't negatively impact the society based on the benefits that he wants to see, or he didn't avoid breaking the laws or anything based on his own behavior. So we're going to rule that out. We're also going to rule out social contract and individual rights because he's not sacrificed himself to benefit a particular group of people. If anything, he's actually bringing down a particular group of people and degraded someone in some way, shape, or form, which is actually taking away their rights, which is restricting them. So he didn't rewrite his own social contract to benefit other people. His behavior was demeaning and dragging people down. So now we have obedience and punishment orientation, or conformity and interpersonal accord. So at this time, we're going to rule out obedience and punishment orientation because he didn't avoid doing a behavior in order to not be punished, or he didn't do a behavior because he wanted to be punished. His concerns are all around his friends thinking he's a bully and not wanting him around anymore. So at this time, his focus is on social acceptance and conforming to the rules and regulations to have positive interpersonal relationships. He went against that, so he's fearing that he's going to be rejected from his peer group in some way, shape, or form. So the correct answer here is conformity and interpersonal accord because his focus is on the acceptance of his peers rather than appeasing a person of authority or going against a particular person of authority because you don't like them and want to be punished in some way, shape, or form. So conformity and interpersonal accord is about that social acceptance. And since he's fearing that he's going to be rejected by his peers, that's why he is in that stage right now. Question 10. A mother of a 12-year-old boy contacts a crisis hotline and states that her son has been becoming more distant from her and overly structured with his routines. The mother feels like she does not understand what is going on with her son and is beginning to feel like a bad mother. She states, I am feeling hopeless and unsure what to do. What should the social worker do first to help the mother? A. Educate the mother on the developmental stage her son is in. B. Validate the mother's concerns. C. Explore the mother's mental status. D. Assess when the son's behavior changed. When you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from the session tonight. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is A. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. So we have a mother of a 12-year-old boy. She contacts a crisis hotline, states her son has been becoming more distant from her and overly structured with his routines. The mother feels like she does not understand what's going on with her son, and she's starting to feel like a bad mother, so hard on herself. She reports, I'm feeling hopeless and I'm not sure what to do. What should the social worker do first to help the mother? In this particular situation, it's an application question. Why is it an application question, you may be wondering? Because it's a client scenario that we have to apply social work terms, concepts, and theories to help address and find the answer and navigate it in some way. So we can utilize the acronym SFARFI: safety, feelings, assess, refer, educate, advocate, facilitate, and intervene to navigate the answering process. So educate the mother on the developmental stage her son is in. Educate why we're providing her information about the developmental stages in this current situation. Validate the mother's concerns, feelings. Why? Because we're recognizing and meeting her where she's at so we can start establishing that rapport and telling her how I can see how this situation can be really difficult for you and I'm here for you. Explore the mother's mental status, safety. Why? Because it's making sure she's not trying to harm herself, harm anyone else. Make sure she's not delusional or psychotic or any way like that. D, assess when the mother's behavior changed or when the son's behavior changed. Assess why it's gathering information, that clinical objective information. So let's get that quick review in. A mother of a 12-year-old boy contacts a crisis hotline, a crisis hotline, a crisis hotline. Why? Because she's in crisis. So that's where we're at. States her son is becoming more distant and overly structured. She feels like she does not understand what's going on. She's starting to feel like a bad mother. So that's some negative emotions that she's experiencing in her situation. And she says, I'm feeling hopeless and I'm not sure what to do. So at this given time, it also says to help the mother. So the mother is the person of interest in this situation at this time. So we're going to rule out D because that's talking about the son. Yeah, she was talking about the son, but that's not the particular angle we have to take because we have to help her in her situation at this time. We're not going to just immediately educate this woman who called the crisis hotline about the stage of development that her son's in. And we don't know the stage of development that her son is in because she just told us a little bit of information. So do we want to meet this mother where she's at, or do we want to see what this person's doing? Mental status, does she want to hurt herself, hurt anyone else, or do anything in any particular situation? So at this time, we're going to rule out B. Yeah, we want to recognize where she's at, but we want to make sure she's not a danger to herself, others, abusing anyone, or neglecting anyone. for the sole fact that she called a crisis hotline. So that's how we look at that question in particular.